reader is Rosie Corey. Rosie hails from New Paltz, New York, where she earned her bachelor's in adolescent education before coming to Rosemont to pursue her MFA. Some of her short stories have been published through writing contests in various communities, the most recent being in 2012. She has just finished giving birth to her novel, Angels of Erythea, a process that began a little over 9 years ago. Talk about hard labor. Angels of Erythea, a contemporary new adult urban fantasy, is the first book in a planned trilogy, and she hopes it doesn't take nearly as long to write the next two.
We were given a single rest day each week. Most of us spent our time up in the gyms doing our own personal training. Sam and Alex invited me to go with them during our first rest day, but my self-consciousness got the better of me, so I chose to go for a walk around the compound instead. The overgrowth on the island was dense in certain places surrounding the structure, but farther out towards the coast there was lush grass and few trees, then nothing but ocean. I made my way out towards the shore and sat down on a thick oak trunk that had been severed and now lay decaying. There was the faintest outline of land to the north, but I had no idea what it was. I glanced out east towards home. I wasn't officially homesick yet, but I'd been thinking a lot about my mother and about Erica. I had called her the other day, and she'd kept me on the phone for over an hour, updating me on her life, telling me how much she missed me. Of course, I told her about how my experience in Guatemala was going, and she seemed interested. She asked when I would be coming home, and I told her I didn't know yet, which was the truth. "Do you think it might rain?" I heard a voice ask. I started and glanced to my left. A young woman was standing a few paces away, wearing a tight-fitting brown dress that was cut low in the front, exposing a significant amount of cleavage. She had her long-nailed hand on her hip, cocked to one side as if posing. Her skin was dark, like burnt sienna, but also rusty, like dried-up blood. Straight, glossy black hair hung down her back and shoulders. She wasn't looking at me, but stared straight ahead. "It's possible," I said, figuring she was a fellow criminal, although her outfit seemed odd, especially for a place like this. A few of us had hung around the compound instead of going up to Erythea, so she must be out on a walk as well. But in heels? She turned to face me, and I could see a fire in her eyes, a glow that came from deep within her irises. She was breathtakingly beautiful. "I think it's going to pour," she said. "In fact, I know it'll pour." "How?" I found myself asking. The stranger flashed her bleach-white teeth. "Because I'm going to make it pour. It all starts with a storm, which is brewing even as we speak. It's building and building until, bam! The skies are going to open up, and all that rain is going to fall and fall and fall until it drowns the world." "What?" I asked. In response, she let out a high-pitched, borderline cackle of a laugh that shook me. "Oh, it's such a shame. Daddy said you were a lot smarter." "Excuse me?" "I've just been so anxious to meet you," she said, striding over to the tree where I sat. She paused a few paces away, delicately stuck out her ass, and sat down on the stump. I could feel a heat from underneath me, heard a sizzle. "Whoops," she said, and jumped up again. I stared in horror at the place where she had been, where a charred patch of wood was smoking in the aftermath of a fire. I stood up and then stared at the stranger. "You're not a criminal, are you?" "Oh, very good! You're getting the hang of it." "Who are you?" I asked. She didn't answer me. Her eyes narrowed and her mouth curved upwards into a smirk. She began to pace, slowly circling in towards me. I realized I had no weapon. "Do you know why I like you?" she asked. I didn't answer. "You have such a big, open heart. It's one of your finest qualities." She reached into her dress and drew out a dagger. "It would be such a shame to have to kill you. You get back inside the compound where it's safer," he said. Despite his demanding tone, I wasn't about to ignore that advice, but a question was burning on my tongue. "What did she want with me?" I asked. Nathaniel studied me for a moment. "I have no idea," he said.
Corey received a BA in English at Otterbein University and is a graduate of Rosemont's MFA Creative Writing program. He will be reading from his poetry collection, Edges of a Man and Kings.
The first poem is 4 Flights Up on Main Street. I was a king like them. Our crowns glittered, and each topaz beetle of streetlight glowed soft and knowing under our shoes. The angled arm of Alum Creek embraced our world, and we were part of that. Jack had invited us along to the roof of the science building, forbidden for not having guardrails at its edges. The whole way up the 4 cinder block flights, our voices bounced around us like fruit bats. But up there, we chipped away the quiet of the crackling star maps overhead. Alex clung to the night air. It was warm and thick like a grandmother's kitchen. Chelsea held Alex's hand but looked at Jack, calculating another life in each line around her eyes. An October breeze stuttered past. It smelled like mud, like it had just rained, but the sky had been glass marble clear for a week now. I hugged myself, ignoring my stinging arm. I dangled over the southeast drop-off, and behind the hulking shoulders of Cowan Hall, the fraternity house was kicked by fingerful oak trees. I had a life down there, one made of matchboxes and Thanksgiving meals and blood-crusted paper clips, but in that high auditorium of evening, I wouldn't have recognized the sound of my own name. It was the first poem I wrote at Rosemont, and so I felt like it was a fitting way to end. It's called Brotherhood. I sat in the recliner on the front porch reading Tolstoy and drinking lemonade from a curved plastic bottle. The helium light of the afternoon freed me from the heaviness of curriculum. The breeze clung to uncut grass, and I gripped at a silence precious and mine. Then the boys came running up with the moose. It was spray-painted a cymbal crash orange. One of its antlers was broken. Jack was shouting and Kyle was grunting up the street. The concrete ungulate had been stolen from the clubhouse in an ongoing war between the fraternities to possess it. The poor little guy, now rescued from his beer pong wasteland around the corner, was painted gold and stationed proudly in our crested front walk. We sat there for hours, our easy-chair fortress gaining guards. Chelsea sat in the grass with Jordan, braiding clover flowers into crowns. They put one on Alex's head, and he sneezed, but he let it stay. We were bound to that bruised little brother of ours. Too soon we were all to be greeted with the cotton hold of evening and the subsequent loss of the moose into the arms of some greenback interlopers. But for this incomprehensible moment, at the cusp of afternoon's release, we sat upon our thrones, kings of each other's destinies, a human cathedral of contentment that couldn't be rebuilt on any sky-dredged portion of porch. Thank you.
Cynthia June Long is a mild-mannered librarian by day and a writer by night. She's been writing her novel for almost half a lifetime and started at Rosemont, believe it or not, in summer 2010. Tonight she will read from her thesis, The Stolen Child, a novel about fairies in contemporary America.
Mark stepped in front of Dana, the back of his shoulders pressed against her as he made himself her shield. She saw a flicker of movement, hummingbird fast, and as she blinked, several figures dropped down onto the muddy road, landing in a crouch and springing to their feet. A flurry of slender hands straightened wide-brimmed hats atop smooth, boyish faces. A dozen figures, improbably dressed in pinstriped suits, blocked their path. Dana squinted up into the sky and then back down at the strangers. The gentlemen had materialized, as if from nowhere. They wore narrow lapel jackets with matching vests or bone-button suspenders. High-waisted, cuffed trousers graced black and white wingtip shoes. Entirely inappropriate attire for hiking. She was too startled to do anything but watch as they took up position around her and Mark. They raised wooden pikes and spears. The staves bore round seed pods like withered sunflowers or some other plant, flecked with dark, hollow circles that called to mind a Tommy. Good job, boyos. One of the gangsters, Dana knew of no other way to think of them, was a head taller than the others. He stepped forward, a charcoal gray jacket containing his broad shoulders. A striped pocket handkerchief matched the shirt beneath and drew Dana's eyes to his firm chest. Well done. His sonorous voice was as warm as sunlight. Amber eyes peered out beneath the white fedora with an eaglet feather tucked inside a silken band. He carried no stick, no weapon. An acorn signet set with a large topaz glistened on his knobby finger. The gang of overdressed hikers straightened proudly at their leader's words. One jabbed a spear near Dana's chest. Their leader waved him back. Marcial Diamond, he greeted, looking Mark fully in the face. So this is the young Iron Lady you've been sessions to see. His voice was raw honeycomb, still in the hive, equally seducing and filled with bees. Mark bristled. Dana felt his muscles tense, saw the hair on his arm stand on edge. My session attendance is fine. If you have something to say to me, do so and be done. Leave her out of it. She's far too beautiful to ignore, the stranger said, sidestepping Mark and dropping to one knee in the mud with a dramatic sweep of his hand. May I have the pleasure of your acquaintance? I am Niccolo Elman. I think we may have met. Mark pressed his body more firmly against her. Her name is none of your... Dana, she found herself answering, reflexively, as if prompted by a schoolteacher. It never occurred to her to demur. Beautiful, he called her beautiful, dusty inside-out jacket and all. She tightened her ponytail. A swarm of insects inside her head made it difficult to think. He was handsome, like a rock musician or a movie star. Coal black hair fell past his ears to run down slender cheeks and carpet his angular chin. Dana Colleen McGuire. She stepped aside from Mark and extended her hand. The man smiled. You may call me Nick. He rose to his feet smoothly, flourishing a hand in front of his legs. Not a splatter or smudge marred his trousers. He grasped the tip of her fingers and planted a kiss on the back of her hand. His lips were soft as silk. All the adrenaline of being lost in the woods fled her body, leaving Dana with an exhaustion deeper than her 7-mile run and the endless wandering. Her knees were woozy. She was hungry. She wanted to sink down in the mud. It was difficult to concentrate. She clung to Mark's arm and found herself shaking. I want to go home, she said in a small voice. You heard the lady. Excuse us. Mark stepped forward, pulling her hand. The man called Nick stepped in front of him. Let me provide an escort. He was closer to them now, and he touched the top of Dana's forehead, brushing away strands of hair. His fingers were the cool caress of an ocean breeze. Would you like to come with me, my sweet? His voice pulled like the moon upon tides. His companions, who had looked like gangsters before, now seemed more like honor guards, or even, dare she think it, matching groomsmen. She had always loved playing dress-up. Boys were blue jeans and simple shirts, but it took a man to fill out a suit. Here was a whole troop of them as her own escort. Dana giggled. True, something didn't seem right about them, as if they'd looked different before, but for the life of her, she couldn't remember. No, thank you. Mark grasped her elbow and started to edge sideways. Dana pulled back. She found herself piqued that Mark was answering for her. She wished the infernal bees in her head would stop buzzing long enough for her to think. You are so like a flower, my dear. Nick cupped Dana's chin in his palm and stroked her cheek. So stunning, so delicate, so full of life. Dana found it hard to breathe. She felt herself melting like butter in the sun. She could listen to Niccolo Elman's soothing voice forever. So fragile, so breakable, he added, turning his eyes upon Mark. As chief of security, I couldn't bear if something happened on my watch. He glanced back at Dana. Mark pulled her back. Her vision dizzied and cleared. She's under my protection. He brushed aside the branches of the ceremonial weapons. Were they only boys playing with wooden sticks? Not that they looked like boys. Dana rubbed her forehead. Everything seemed so blurry. Don't listen to him, Mark advised. Nick sneered, his pert nose wrinkling, an ugly gesture on his handsome face. I didn't realize Madame President had granted you the authority to offer sanctuary. Mark pulled her tightly to him as he stepped aside, keeping his body between hers and Elman's. We're in her world now. Dana felt a little like a kid again, with complex adult conversations going on above her head that she couldn't understand. She wouldn't be surprised if they started spelling words out. If only her head didn't hurt. Really? Nick asked. And the woods flickered like heat rising from pavement on an August afternoon. The road seemed foggy, the trees beyond it draped in gauze. Dana wondered if it was going to rain. Are you so certain of the borders? Mark cast his eyes toward the horizon, and in that flash second, the henchman pressed closer. Dana huddled against Mark. Nick stepped between his companions. Pushing the sticks away from Dana's side, he stopped directly in front of Mark. She's a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. Do you really want a charge of obstructing justice? Justice? Mark raised his voice, and Dana shrank back. She didn't like the angry voices. Why was everybody shouting? She would just go home herself, the hell with them all. She let go of Mark's hand. You don't want treason added to that list, darling. We belong together. I'll keep you safe. Dana hesitated between the two men. She'd longed for Mark for so many days, only to discover his peculiarities distressing. But he had found her when lost in the woods. He genuinely seemed to care, and his cherubic hair was so damn luxurious. On the other hand, Nick, the dark-haired stranger, bore an athletic build and a bodyguard stance that promised safety. His speech exuded strength and confidence. She wanted to reach out and caress the silk of his pocket square. He was a much better dresser. She glanced at the acorn ring, and probably wealthier. Nick was a man. She looked back at Mark. She was so tired of boys. She was so tired, period.
Her poetry thesis is entitled Tell Me Something Terrible, and her advisor was the lovely Christine Salvador Smith. JJ has been published in Lipstick Party Mag, The Longleaf Pine, and The Legendary. She is pleased as a pickled pepper to read for you tonight and wants to bless all your little hearts.
Some days the words are stones or stars buried within a muffled heart, a secret galaxy bearing terrible powers. Some days the words are a tame temptress, humming strange sounds, a wild melody daring me to chase her beyond the tree line. Some days the words are a web of Christmas ornaments I am tasked to untangle, separating handmade from store-bought. Some days the words are meat gasps found in the last place I look. Some days the words are lightning bugs, floating apparitions appearing only to vanish. Some days the words reduce me to my least self, saturating my last soupçon of peace. Some days the words won't come. The next one I entitled Schizoaffective. Schizoaffective disorder, for those of you who don't know, is a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And what that does is give me the permission to write a bunch of words and have it be called a poem. So, schizoaffective. The heroine, the martyr, the degenerate, you don't know that you know you're looking for. What keys of string open hatred, painfully aware of this heart's history, vanishing or vanished, goodbye forever. Further mending, no. Measure these gasps and murmurs while bitterness buzzes. Damn the devil, the wronging of a right, this blessing little alone. Why did you leave me believing only the dead can feel time, twist its key, crank the needle in our backs, averting their eyes toward the blue beacon, sitting backwards in huge silence? Can you say it's me you said you loved? Continuing with my theme. This one is called Decay. Even after it is declared dead, even when there is no proof of a pulse, the heart keeps giving to the departed, asking, why do you leave? Because the rancid stench of our memories reeks, permeates from my pores, its raunchy, rotting flavor doubles me over, its brutal pull pins me to the ground, murmurs, you are not loved. This bloody wound you left seeks swarms of flies to eat me alive. The sticky slime squirm of newborn maggots moves the bile from my gut and announces the jig is up. Thank God the fight is over. It has taken me a lifetime to die. The next one I wrote specifically for this thesis. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it happened, but it did, and I want to share it with you. It is called Make Your Mark, Heavy and Dark. I blame you for my forest fire heart. An accidental spark you should have stamped out. Instead, you stacked the splinters, stoked the embers, exhaled to breathe life. By the time you slipped into the smoke, a sly magician's grand finale, my blaze had broken free. My flame will never fear another man. I will scorch their fickle flesh, kiss cursive lines along crooked spines, sprinkle cinder over sentimental psyches. I will find trust, rip it up by the roots, then lay waste to acres of sweet nothings. I will regret nothing I ruin. Your evil extinguishes my guilt, gorges on delicious torment. Your ghost supplies inexhaustible darkness, desperate to consume, while I radiate a resilient glow, a slow, searing eclipse. You must realize you cannot stop what you started. You cannot snuff out my light. Your eyes were blue, the color of a chilly chlorine-laced public pool on the first day of summer. The exact moment the tips of my toes dipped, broke the surface, invigorated nerve endings that hadn't been exposed all year. My heart was high. The equivalent of a diving board's altitude to my once 7-year-old self, terrified of heights on the last day of swimming lessons when I was supposed to climb to the peak, then prove I could jump and not drown. Our love was deep. It rested on the cement bottom, below the blue, waited for the tips of my toes to touch, push up, propel myself topside, perform a perfect breaststroke, then lift myself over the edge, to drip with glorious grandeur, to win the gold, the key to the mint, to your heart, except I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't connect conscious thought to action, couldn't uncurl the tips of my toes, unfurl fists, clenched, conflicted adrenal glands demanding fight or flight or fall, unable to muster enough gumption to force myself forward one step, fear-frozen, bargained with God, get me down, then begged for one bold gust of wind in the right direction to thrust me in, ready or not. Thank you all.
Ray dragged her sorry, unemployed self to Rosemont College 3 long years ago and never looked back. Since then, she has established a new career, won a National Poetry Prize, had her work featured in 8 excellent publications, joined the editorial team of a reputable online magazine, and experienced what can only be described as artistic and academic fulfillment. She blames everyone in this room for giving her the best time of her entire goddamn life. She will be reading from her essay collection, Wake Up the Ghosts.
1990, tomato gravy. He brought a footstool over to the sink and told me to take my position. I did so, already dressed up in an oversized apron that probably had a bikini body or Kiss the Chef on it. Ready, Daddy. I felt chosen, lucky. I was helping with something rare and historical. First, we had to scrub out the sink. It was very important, he explained to me, to get the sink super duper clean so nothing at all was stuck to it. After that, he plugged up the drain with a rubber stopper and put a dinner plate over that curved side down to create a vacuum. Beside us on the counter, can after can of San Marzano tomatoes, whole plums, swollen and naked, floating in their own heady red juice. The yellow and green labels stacked up, making a Warhol-esque design in our otherwise beige kitchen. He hadn't done this in years. His own Babci taught him when he was as big as me. Snow fell outside the window. Maybe. Perhaps I assigned snow to all my best memories to give the machine of magic and quiet. I stood at the sink waiting while he twisted and twisted the can opener until every can of tomatoes was open. Then he said, "Go ahead, bombs away." I took the first can and dumped it, top over bottom, into the sink. The red juice and seeds splashed up into my face. "Careful," he said. "We don't want to lose a drop of this stuff. It's too good."
I picked up the next can and tipped it gently into the white porcelain sink, watching the slimy crimson planets knocking against each other in the vibrant mess. Can after can until everything was in. Now, he said with a sly grin, we squish. He stood behind me, and with our 4 hands, mine small and youthful, his rough and calloused, we squished and squished. We got squirted in the face, and some slippery plum bodies tried to escape our wrath, but we wouldn't have it. In the neon blue of a winter afternoon, when it may or may not have been snowing, we laughed and squished until there was nothing more to hold on to, until our hands were moving together in the tomato shreds, the juice. And then he scooped the red slurry up with the empty cans, poured all of it into a stock pot bigger than me, and the wonderful concoction simmered on low with onions and garlic for hours, until the house smelled supernatural. 1997, around the table. My mother was not a cook. She was an orderer. Fuquai Inn, Janny, Salerno's, Pizza Hut, Jim's Steaks. She made a few simple dishes over and over again. Baked ziti with sausage, seafood Alfredo with imitation crab meat from the grocery store, chicken soup with fat egg noodles and an oil slick on every bowl. But that was on weekends when she didn't have to work late. During the week, Dad had dinner duty. He was no Wolfgang Puck, but it was more daring than our standard comfort food casseroles. My father introduced me to flounder, fried briefly in a hot pan, drizzled with melted butter, flecked with little stars of black peppercorn. He showed me steamed broccoli with lemon and sautéed shrimp and big otherworldly crab legs, real ones, reaching out of the massive stock pot. Some nights we shared, huddled over the coffee table with smacking mouths and greasy hands. Some nights we sat at the table. He would relegate my brother and I to the living room during his cooking, and we'd catch him running to his room every so often to get something or check something, he said. After a while, he'd be done, right around the time my mom came home, and he'd usher us all to sit. The plates would be set with mismatched cutlery and paper towels ripped in half. He'd barely say hello to my mother, in her lovely fog of Jean de Tay and peppermint fluoride. Sit, sit, he insisted, time to eat. And he'd carefully serve each of us whatever he had made. Spaghetti and meatballs, roasted potatoes and steak with A1 sauce, sautéed vegetables, and buttery chicken. After we were all served, he'd keep orbiting the kitchen, claiming he forgot to bake the rolls or didn't get a chance to ladle the gravy out of the pot. Rick, my mom would say between bites, sit down, have something. But he wouldn't do it. Sometimes he'd keep himself busy with things he forgot. Sometimes he would just watch us, making sure we were okay. He looked so sad when he did that, with this teary, bittersweet smile on his face, like we were going to disappear at any moment. Dad, sit with us. He didn't eat anything, but he'd always insist he was fine, not hungry at all. It always sounded to me like he was saying, look at my penance for being such an asshole. I don't deserve to eat. You eat. You forgive me. I almost never clean my plate. My dad was so quietly joyful, so grateful for this gift I gave him, this small act of eating sandwiches on the sand. I tried to look out at forever and feel small again, but I couldn't. I was heavy, my shoulders pushed down toward the earth by my own sacredness. Thanks.
Thanks again to everyone for coming, and congratulations once again to all the incredible graduates. Let's give everybody one more round of applause.